The story is set in a quiet, wealthy neighborhood in America. At the end of a cul-de-sac stands a large, luxurious house surrounded by a beautiful garden. Although it's full of expensive furniture and decorations, it doesn't feel like a warm, happy home. It's a place where the people inside, especially Margaret, feel trapped in their own lives. Margaret is a 50-year-old woman, elegant but weary. She's married to Daniel, a successful businessman, but their marriage is distant and cold. Margaret has always felt neglected by Daniel, who spends most of his time working and barely pays attention to her. Although she lives in luxury, she feels lonely and unfulfilled. Margaret longs for excitement and connection, but she's stuck in a life where everything seems perfect on the outside, but empty on the inside. Jake is a 19-year-old handyman, recently hired to work for the Williams family. He's young, handsome, and charming, but he has his own problems, such as financial struggles and a troubled past. Jake is used to working hard for a living, and when he starts working for Margaret, he sees it as an opportunity to improve his life. He's drawn to Margaret's beauty and loneliness, and the two begin a secret affair. At first, Jake sees it as a way to escape his difficult life, but soon the affair leads to dangerous consequences. Daniel is in his 60s and is Margaret's husband. He's a wealthy and powerful businessman who built his success from the ground up. However, he's emotionally distant and often absent from home. He spends most of his time working and doesn't notice that his marriage is falling apart. Daniel believes that providing for Margaret financially is enough to make her happy, but he doesn't understand that what she really needs is love and attention. Margaret Williams feels trapped in a marriage that has lost its spark. Despite living in luxury, her life with Daniel, her husband, is anything but fulfilling. Daniel, a successful businessman, is constantly consumed by his work. He spends long hours at the office and often travels for business, leaving Margaret alone in their vast, empty house. What was once a passionate relationship has slowly turned into a cold, distant partnership. The emotional connection she once had with Daniel has vanished, replaced by a quiet, growing resentment. Margaret's loneliness is palpable. Her days are filled with the monotony of maintaining the house, attending social events where she feels like a trophy wife, and waiting for a husband who never seems to notice her struggles. She longs for someone to truly see her, someone to fill the emptiness in her life. As the years go by, her dissatisfaction deepens, and the desire for anything different becomes overwhelming. Margaret feels forgotten, invisible, and emotionally starved. One afternoon, the doorbell rings, signaling the arrival of Jake Thompson, the young handyman hired to fix some minor issues around the house. Margaret is immediately struck by his youthful energy and charm. Jake, at 19, is full of life, confidence, and an undeniable appeal that Margaret hasn't felt in years. His appearance, athletic, with messy brown hair and warm blue eyes, catches her off guard. But it's more than just his looks, it's his presence. Jake is different from anyone she's known. He's not weighed down by the pressures of wealth or success. He's not distant or preoccupied. He's alive, vibrant, and free. Jake's arrival stirs something deep inside Margaret. She hasn't felt this alive in a long time. The mundane routines of her life seem to shift when he's around. At first, it's harmless, a friendly conversation, a polite exchange. But there's an undeniable connection between them, an electric tension that neither can deny. Despite the obvious age difference, the chemistry between them is palpable. Margaret begins to notice little things: Jake's smile, the way his eyes linger just a moment too long, and his relaxed, easygoing nature. It's a stark contrast to the cold distance she shares with Daniel. Every time Jake enters the room, she can't help but feel drawn to him, even if she tries to ignore it. It begins with casual conversations. At first, they discuss trivial things: the weather, the tasks Jake is working on, and the occasional compliment from Margaret about how well he's fixing things around the house. But soon, their conversations start to drift into more personal territory. Margaret finds herself sharing small details about her life, her loneliness, her dissatisfaction, her feelings of being trapped in a marriage that no longer excites her. Jake listens intently, his eyes focused on her every word. He's not just hearing her, he's seeing her. He's interested, not in her money or her status, but in her as a person. This simple attention is something Margaret has desperately craved. Over time, their interactions become more charged. There's laughter in their conversations, a playful teasing that wasn't there before. Margaret starts to catch herself lingering around the house when Jake is working, striking up conversations more frequently. She's not sure when it happens, but the lines between friendliness and flirtation begin to blur. Compliments Jake gives her, subtle, sincere, are unlike anything Daniel has said in years. She finds herself thinking about Jake even when he's not around. The longing for excitement that has simmered beneath the surface for so long starts to bubble up. One evening, when Daniel is away on another business trip, the tension between Margaret and Jake finally reaches its breaking point. Margaret is alone in the house, and Jake is fixing a light in the hallway. The atmosphere is thick with unspoken words, with the weight of their attraction hanging in the air. Their glances linger longer than usual, and when Jake brushes past her, his body almost touches hers. Margaret feels a surge of desire, something she hasn't felt in years. She's tired of being ignored, of feeling invisible, and Jake's attention has ignited a fire in her that she can't ignore. In a moment of vulnerability, Margaret makes a decision. She invites Jake to stay for a drink after he finishes his work. The conversation is light, but the energy between them is different. It's electric, charged with something neither can deny. As the evening progresses, the distance between them closes, and soon they find themselves standing close together, their breath mingling in the quiet of the house. Before either can fully process what's happening, Margaret reaches out and kisses Jake, her emotions overtaking her sense of caution. Jake, surprised but equally drawn to her, responds. The kiss is hesitant at first, but it quickly turns into something more intense. What starts as a moment of rebellion against her stagnant marriage, an act of defiance against the emotional neglect she's felt for years, soon spirals into a passionate, heated affair. The kiss becomes the first of many secret encounters, each one fueled by desire, secrecy, and the thrill of the forbidden. What began as a moment of weakness, for Margaret, an impulsive decision driven by her yearning for attention, turns into a passionate affair that will change everything. Their connection deepens, and though both know it's dangerous, neither can stop it. What once felt like a fleeting escape from her painful reality becomes an all-consuming obsession, and Margaret finds herself caught in a web of desire that she can't untangle. As Margaret gets more involved with Jake, her feelings for him become stronger. What started as a way to escape her lonely marriage now feels like the most important part of her life. She spends a lot of time thinking about Jake and the passion they share. Every moment with him makes her feel special and alive, something she hasn't felt in a long time with Daniel. However, the affair also makes her feel guilty. Margaret loves her husband, but she's growing more distant from him. Daniel is busy with work and often away, leaving her feeling alone. But every time she's with Jake, she tries to push the guilt aside. She's torn between her loyalty to Daniel and the excitement she feels with Jake. Margaret becomes more worried about hiding her secret, but she can't help how she feels about Jake. Jake is not just looking for affection from Margaret, he is also struggling with money and sees the affair as a way to improve his life. He didn't have much growing up, and he wants something more. When he starts the affair with Margaret, he sees an opportunity not only for love, but also for a better future. He becomes more focused on what he can get from Margaret. Jake pushes for more gifts, money, and promises about their future. He starts to act like the affair isn't just about passion anymore, but about what he can gain. While Margaret wants to keep the affair about their connection, Jake is hoping it will give him the stability he's been lacking. As the affair continues, Margaret becomes more anxious about being caught. She starts to lie to Daniel about where she's been and what she's doing. She tries to be careful, but the fear of discovery is always in the back of her mind. She even feels the weight of the secret when Daniel is around, though he doesn't seem to notice. Jake's behavior starts to change too. At first, he was patient, but now he is more demanding. He asks for more of her time, more money, and even gets jealous when she spends time with Daniel. He begins to expect more from Margaret, which makes her uncomfortable. She starts to feel like she's losing control of the situation. Margaret feels torn. On one hand, she feels guilty for betraying Daniel. She's been with him for years, and she never wanted to hurt him. But on the other hand, the affair with Jake makes her feel alive in a way she hasn't felt in a long time. Every time they meet, she feels special, something she isn't getting from Daniel. She tries to convince herself that she deserves this excitement and passion. She justifies her actions, thinking that she hasn't felt this happy in years. But deep down, Margaret knows the affair is wrong. The guilt begins to eat at her, and she worries about what might happen if Daniel ever finds out. The risk of being caught makes her anxious, but the pull of Jake's attention keeps her coming back. Daniel has always been a busy man, focused on his work, but lately, he's noticed a change in Margaret's behavior. She's been more distant and preoccupied, spending more time alone and less time with him. He tries to brush it off at first, thinking maybe it's just stress or the usual routine. But as days pass, he feels more disconnected from his wife. The small signs start to add up. She's more secretive with her phone, avoids eye contact, and seems distracted when they're together. Daniel begins to suspect something isn't right, but he can't figure out what's causing the change. His concern slowly shifts into suspicion, though he doesn't want to jump to conclusions. Still, he can't shake the feeling that something is off. Frustrated and unsure, Daniel decides to hire a private investigator to follow Margaret. He believes if he knows what she's up to, he can finally understand what's been pulling her away from him. As the affair between Margaret and Jake grows more intense, Jake becomes more emboldened. What began as a passionate fling is now something Jake feels entitled to. His feelings for Margaret are mixed with a growing sense of dependence, and he starts to see their relationship as more than just a secret affair. He begins demanding things from her, asking for money to help him with his financial struggles, and even asking for expensive gifts. At first, Margaret tries to ignore his requests, hoping that Jake will understand her limitations. But Jake becomes more forceful, threatening to reveal their affair to Daniel if she doesn't give him what he wants. His demands increase, and he begins to manipulate Margaret emotionally, using guilt and intimidation to get what he needs. He knows he has her cornered. She's afraid of what would happen if their affair comes to light, and Jake plays on that fear. Margaret starts feeling trapped and helpless, unable to escape the growing pressure from both Jake and her suspicions about Daniel's increasing doubts. As the weeks go by, Margaret's sense of unease grows. She realizes that the affair has spiraled out of her control. What she once thought would be a brief escape from her unhappy marriage has turned into a dangerous situation. Jake is becoming more unpredictable and manipulative, pushing her for more than she's willing to give. He constantly threatens to expose their secret if she doesn't comply with his increasing demands for money, gifts, and attention. Margaret feels torn. She's terrified of the damage Jake could do if he exposes their affair to Daniel. She's also frightened by Jake's possessive behavior and the way he's trying to control her. The excitement she once felt has now turned into anxiety, and she begins to fear for her safety and reputation. Margaret knows she needs to end the affair, but she doesn't know how to break free from Jake's hold on her. She starts distancing herself from Jake, hoping that if she pulls away, he'll stop pushing for more. But Jake isn't ready to let go. The more Margaret tries to distance herself, the more he becomes demanding and aggressive, leaving her in a constant state of fear. Margaret is no longer just afraid of getting caught. She's afraid of what Jake might do if she tries to end things with him. The situation has become a dangerous web, and Margaret doesn't know how to escape it. The tension between Margaret and Jake reaches a boiling point. Margaret has finally made up her mind to end the affair, but Jake refuses to let go. He has grown attached to her in ways that go beyond just physical attraction. He sees her as his ticket to a better life, and he's not willing to lose that. One evening, after a few days of avoiding him, Margaret agrees to meet Jake at the house, hoping for a calm conversation. However, when she arrives, Jake's anger is palpable. He accuses her of stringing him along, of using him for her own pleasure. His voice is filled with frustration and resentment, and Margaret realizes that Jake's feelings for her have morphed into something dangerous. The more she tries to explain that it's over, the more irate he becomes, shouting at her and making threats. Margaret, fearful of his growing rage, tries to leave, but Jake blocks her way, furious that she's ending things. In his mind, this is not just a breakup, it's a betrayal. He demands to know what she plans to do, accusing her of using him to fulfill her own desires. As the argument escalates, Jake's temper boils over. The emotional and psychological manipulation he's used on Margaret for weeks now erupts in a violent outburst. In a split second, Jake loses control. His anger, mixed with feelings of betrayal and desperation, overwhelms him. He charges at Margaret, shoving her against the wall. Her attempt to back away only drives him further into a fit of rage. They struggle, and in the heat of the moment, Jake either strangles her or strikes her with a violent blow, causing her to collapse. The impact of the attack is enough to take her life. Margaret's body falls to the floor, motionless. For a brief moment, Jake stands over her in disbelief, his heart racing. His emotions swing from anger to panic, realizing the gravity of what he's done. He knows that he's gone too far. There's no turning back. The reality of his actions sets in, and he begins to think quickly, trying to cover his tracks. Panicked, Jake attempts to stage the scene to make it look like an accident. He moves Margaret's body, rearranges things in the room, and tries to make it appear as though a struggle occurred during a break-in. He even goes as far as to make the scene look like a botched robbery, hoping that the authorities will believe it was just a random crime. As he works quickly to cover his tracks, Jake's mind races with fear, wondering if he's left any evidence behind that could connect him to the murder. Jake, now filled with terror, flees the scene. He knows he's just committed an unforgivable act, and he's unsure of what to do next. His heart pounds in his chest as he drives away from the house, trying to erase the image of Margaret's lifeless body from his mind. Every moment feels like a countdown to when the truth will come to light, and he's terrified of getting caught. That night, Daniel returns home after a late business meeting, expecting to find his wife in the house. When he walks in, everything seems eerily quiet. His heart sinks when he enters the living room and sees Margaret's lifeless body on the floor. At first, he can't comprehend what he's seeing. The shock of the situation hits him like a wave, and his mind races to make sense of it. He immediately calls the authorities, but in his gut, he feels like something isn't right. He assumes it was some sort of break-in, a robbery gone wrong. He can't fathom the truth, that his wife's death was not an accident, but the result of a violent confrontation with someone she had trusted. Daniel is devastated, feeling helpless and betrayed. As the investigation unfolds, the truth begins to unravel, and the shocking nature of Margaret's affair and its deadly consequences begins to surface. Detective Laura Brooks is assigned to investigate Margaret Williams' death. At first, it looks like a random break-in gone wrong, but something doesn't feel right to her. She looks through the house's security footage and sees a young man, later identified as Jake Thompson, leaving the house the night of the murder. He seems nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder, which raises suspicion. Next, Detective Brooks finds Jake's fingerprints inside the house, especially on places that would have been touched only if someone had been there during the crime. One of the neighbors also remembers seeing Jake's car parked outside the house late that night. This makes it clear that Jake was at the house during the time of the murder. Detective Brooks digs deeper into Margaret's personal life. She checks Margaret's phone records and finds that she had been texting and talking to Jake a lot. As the investigation goes on, Brooks discovers letters Margaret had written to Jake, where she talks about her feelings for him and how unhappy she was in her marriage. These letters show that the affair wasn't just physical, it was emotional, too. Brooks also finds out that Jake had been asking Margaret for money and other help. It becomes clear that Jake wasn't just in the relationship for love, he was hoping Margaret would help him financially. The more the detective learns, the more it seems like Jake was using Margaret for his own benefit, especially when it comes to money. After putting all the evidence together, Detective Brooks arrests Jake. He is charged with Margaret's murder. The arrest shocks the community, as no one had suspected that the handyman could be involved in something so violent. The case quickly grabs the attention of the media, with headlines about the affair between an older woman and a younger man. People are fascinated by the scandal, and the trial becomes a public spectacle. Jake's defense team argues that the murder happened in a moment of rage, but the prosecution shows that Jake was using Margaret for money and was willing to kill when he thought she might end the affair. In the end, Jake is found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. His arrest and trial serve as a warning about the dangers of manipulation and betrayal in relationships.